My name is Ryan Plummer, and I'm pleased to be your moderator for today. Today, our conversation is titled Meet the New Draft Growing Medium section of the Canadian Landscape Standard. I know that's a mouthful, but it's going to be a really exciting panel. This is the fourth Greening the Landscape conversation, and we're extremely excited by the momentum that the series is gaining. And I'm told that this is by far our biggest audience to date, so that's a really positive trend. We're heading towards over 100 people joining us today. And in that regard, I want to acknowledge the fruitful collaboration between the Greening the Landscape Research Consortium and the International Society of Arboriculture Ontario, who are co-sponsoring our conversation today. And as we get things started, I'd like to invite everyone joining us to share their involvement in these conversations on social media using the hashtag Greening the Landscape and hashtag ISAO. We are extremely fortunate today to be joined by three distinguished panelists. And in no particular order, let me introduce them. First of all, we have Dr. Rhoda de Jong. Rhoda is a director of the Plant Responses in the Environment Program at Vineland. She's also the lead of the Greening the Landscape Research Consortium. Rhoda completed her PhD at the University of Toronto's Faculty of Forestry, studying the biological control of invasive species in the urban forest, and has worked as a postdoctoral fellow with the Faculty of Forestry and Agriculture in Agri-Food Canada. I learned all about her work in invasive species just the other day, and it's fascinating. Most recently, Rhoda was the technical manager of the urban forestry at the Canadian company Vineland Plant Care, where she identified and tested various management strategies to improve health outcomes for both large trees and recent outplanted trees in the urban forest. Prior to her work in academia, Rhoda gained valuable project management experience in the environmental nonprofit sector in both the USA and Canada. Second, we have Steve Robinson. Now, Steve's voice apparently is going in and out today. We're going to hope that his voice holds up for this conversation. If not, though, he's assured me that he's going to reach down, grab his socks, and mime something using sock puppets. So with that, we know Steve's ready to roll. Steve has a great sense of humor, and he's the manager of urban forests with the City of Burlington, Ontario. Through his team of 20 staff, he's responsible for the ongoing maintenance, planning, growth, and protection of more than 80,000 street and park trees within the city. He is a board-certified master arborist with the International Society of Arboriculture and is the current president of the ISAO board. He's also a certified landscape architect with the Ontario Association of Landscape Architects. Steve has been working as an arborist since 2009. Welcome, Steve, and thanks so much for being with us today. Our final panel member is Ron Koudys. Ron is a principal at Ron Koudys Landscape Architects Incorporated. He's a certified landscape architect and has been instrumental in the development and teaching of landscape design, horticulture, and integrated land planning technology programs at Fanshawe College in Ontario since 1980. As an esteemed professor, in 2008, Ron was awarded the Fanshawe College President's Award of Distinction for his contribution to the college community. In 2009, Ron received the Staff Person of the Year Award by the Association of Canadian Community Colleges, which represents over 150 post-secondary institutions across Canada. Ron is also the recipient of a number of design awards, including the Landscape Ontario President's Award, the National Post Design Effectiveness Award, and many City of London Urban Design Awards. Certified to practice landscape architecture in both Canada and the state of Michigan, Ron provides consulting services for many land developers, municipal governments, and multinational corporations. Ron has also been a participating member in CSLA's Standard Working Committee and has been actively involved in rewriting the growing medium section. Ron, welcome. Thanks so much for being on our panel today. We really appreciate it. Before we get to our panel, let me say a little bit more just about the way this morning will work and questions and answers and so on. So today's conversation is also going to include an opportunity for you to connect not just with our panelists, but also with soil analysis experts who are here to help answer your questions related to soil analysis and soil health. Both Jason Henry and Jill Booth from Vineland's Environment Horticulture Soil Lab will be available in the chat to field any technical questions you have about soils. So if you want to nerd out about any technical aspects of soils, Jill and Jason are your people. You can choose to message them directly by selecting their names in the to line, or submit your questions into the larger discussion so we can all learn together. Now, because we're also using the chat to talk to our soil experts, we ask that you submit any questions you have for all of our panelists using the hashtag panel. We're anticipating some lively discussion today, so please do tag your questions in the chat, hashtag panel, so our team working behind the scenes can ensure those questions get back to me and I can in turn pose them to our panelists. Finally, if you are an ISAO member looking to collect a CEU for this session today, a friendly reminder to please remain in our webinar for the full duration of the event so that our event metrics show that you attended the entire session. And once it ends, you may contact, once it ends and the Zoom window closes, then it automatically is over. If you have any questions at all relating to the CEUs, please feel free to contact the ISAO or the Greening the Landscape research team. And of course, our amazing group behind the scenes will throw all those details into the chat. So any problems at all that you have with your CEUs, just reach out to either one of those addresses and they'll be happy to help you. So in addition to having by far the most participants we've ever had at one of our conversations, I also have to say this is probably one of the longest introductions we've ever had to a conversation panel, and I apologize for that. So let's get right into it from here. The title of today is Meet the New Draft Growing Medium section of the Canadian Landscape Standard. And I know our panelists and technical experts are really keen to start answering questions. So before they do though, I think I just want to provide a little bit of context about the Canadian Landscape Standard and particularly Section 5. So the CLS seeks to define the best practices for landscape construction in Canada by presenting tools and resources relevant to the design, building, and maintenance of landscapes and green infrastructure projects across our country. The CLS exists as a living document that is continuously reviewed, updated, and revised in order to meet the needs of the Canadian landscape horticulture industry. Industry members from across the country, such as landscape architects, landscape contractors, nursery growers, land managers, all rely on the CLS to design, build, operate, and maintain key features of our Canadian landscape. This standard is jointly administered by the Canadian Nursery Landscape Association and the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects. Section 5, which we're focusing on today, of the Canadian Landscape Standard, otherwise known as the National Growing Medium Standard, focuses on outlining the minimum standards and practices relevant to the design, installation, and maintenance of growing media as it is used in the landscape projects across our country. So, with all that as background, I want to start off with the very first question. And Rhoda, it goes to you. Are you ready?
All right, go for it.
Fantastic. Can you share with us the inner workings? This is a glimpse we get into how the draft of Section 5 of the Canadian Landscape Standards, otherwise known as these National Growing Medium Standards, how did it actually come to be? Can you take us inside that process and share that with us?
Sure, Ryan, that's a great question. And first, I do want to say that it's just so thrilling and wonderful to be here. This is my first time in this role as the new director of the Plant Responses and Environment team here at Vineland. And so much of this work went on even before I started here. And it's really important work. And so it's great to be part of the conversation and share, in particular, a lot of the inner workings that have gone on. And really, it's been going on for quite some time. For a number of years, our team here at Vineland had our sights set on this growing media standard section of the Canadian Landscape Standard. We know that this document has the ability to help so many different people. And so we're thrilled, frankly, when the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects announced that they had an open call to rewrite this section. And so then Vineland was awarded that contract to take the rewrite on in 2021. And it's, big work in project, or big work in process. And so our approach to rewrite this entire section 5 was a 5-step process mostly. And we took an evidence-based approach, of course, and really sought to address any gaps in the knowledge that we had right now. So a lot of this was relying on the scholarly literature, technical documents, and also making sure that we were having one-on-one interviews, talking with the people, the boots on the ground, to make sure that we had all the information available and making sure that it was geographically relevant as well. So talking with folks all across Canada. So that would be most useful for everyone. So those 5 steps were, well, step 1, to really undertake that first systemic review of the literature. What's out there? What is available for us to really read up on? And so in that literature, we were able to identify current practices for soil standards and specs across Canada. And a lot of that was based on technical documents that were already reported by cities or NGOs or conservation authorities, as well as obviously the scientific peer-reviewed literature. So then with that base, then we went to step 2, and we had a lot of those consultations and interviews with research agencies, different practitioners, environmental testing agencies too, the folks who are testing the soil, and CLS members across Canada, in order to make sure that all regions were represented and that they all had the chance to input what they wanted to say for this section. And that really helped us to understand the resource availability, in part because we don't want to recommend amending soil with a certain type of sand or organic amendment that's just simply not available in BC, but is prevalent in Nova Scotia. So making sure that the recommendations are relevant across Canada, and also to make sure that the industry can really adopt and use this section. We don't want a document that sits on a shelf. We want a document that's usable by all. So then building off of those consultations in step 3, we built our own database, and we populated it with soil and organic amendment analysis conducted on samples that were supplied to us from all across Canada. And this really told us what suppliers are making available right now, and the physical, chemical, and biological properties of those products. And that allowed us to explore what types of organic and inorganic materials different regions across Canada have in order to generate the growing media, to make the suppliers have the ability to take on the changes that we make to the growing media section. And then step 4 was the fun one. This is where we were able to develop and rewrite the section of the standard, so section 5. And this rewrite was based on all of that information we gathered in steps 1 through 3. And then from this, we developed a draft to present initially to the CLS steering committee. And that sort of work continues to this day to make sure that we have something everybody can agree on that will have a real impact. And it seems simple, like just make a few little recommendations here, a couple tweaks here, but it was a lot of work, and the wealth of information and data that we gathered in steps 1 through 3 were a lot to comprise into just this section. And then now we're at step 5, where this knowledge mobilization and transfer is going on to the CLSA committees. And we created a series of webinar style videos for the CLS committee to share with their members in particular. So that way they can really clearly understand the changes that we've made. So we will continue to make sure that those draft recommendations are accepted, and that we are assuring that everybody's on board with it, so that way we can have it available to all the CSL members.
Rhoda, thanks so much for that wonderful kind of inner workings. And I also want to just say my warmest welcome, now as the individual at the helm of the Greening Landscape Research Consortium. And sincerely thanks also for joining us on a panel. Nothing like your first event putting you on a panel. So welcome, and thanks for that very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
One of the reasons we have these panels and select individuals, and we put a great deal of care and thought into who we ask to be on these panels, is we want to bring together different perspectives and have our panelists speak to those perspectives. And so each of you that are here today are clearly leading landscape professionals in Canada and internationally. And you also bring these really unique perspectives from your respective positions that you hold. So I'm going to ask each of you to please share some of your thoughts from these unique positions and perspectives that you have about the Canadian Landscape Standard and how having this resource is fundamental for landscape professionals across Canada. And Ron, I'm going to ask you to maybe kick us off, if that's okay. Oh, Ron, I think you're still muted.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Perfect, Ron. Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, having a standard, a national standard, begins to give us sort of measurable criteria that we can use to evaluate our work and provide continuity across our industry. You know, the standard that we have now originated in British Columbia, and they've been using it there for 30 years. It's well established and well recognized and implemented across the province. But what goes on in BC doesn't necessarily have relevance in the prairies, in Ontario, in the Maritimes, Quebec. And so what we did was take the BC standard and reviewed it from a national point of view. And what we discovered was soils in BC, they don't have a lot of soil in BC. They manufacture a lot of the soils that they use. In Ontario, we're blessed with lots of soil. And so it's a whole different approach here where we reuse on-site soils or amend soils that are here. So now coming out with this new standard for growing medium gives us a framework that we can begin to talk about. And Ryan, you mentioned this is a living document, that the intent is not that we're going to put something out and this is what it is forever and ever. It's an opportunity to engage the entire community, people who produce soils, people who install and move soils around, landscape architects who are designing around soils, so that we can look at this standard and say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Or no, you know, our information, our knowledge on this particular area is really growing and we can add to the standard. Another thing that this does is begin to provide a legal framework. So it begins to level the playing field. We're not dealing with sort of vague interpretations of what is topsoil. You know, how do we mend soil? How do we do this? How do we do that? Now we have a tool that people can say, all work must conform to the Canadian Landscape Standard. Now we're all dealing with the same thing. All the contractors are bidding using the same criteria, and we're all designing with the same criteria. How to get this implemented, we'll talk about that later on. But in terms of a tool, this is fantastic, and I think it really helps to facilitate growth and quality in the work we do.
Thanks so much, Ron. Really appreciate that perspective. Steve, maybe I can ask you to go next. And you know, fingers crossed that your voice holds out. But from your position, and I mean, you know, doing everything in the city related to trees, by the sounds of it from your bio, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. And thankfully, my stock puppets are on standby. We'll see how this goes. But to really build on what Ron was mentioning, I think that this standard really helps to ensure consistency and accountability. And I approach this as kind of the end user, so to speak, as a municipal arborist or city arborist. And what we often, or how we interface with this is through anything from ranging from development processes like subdivision agreements and things like that, site plan approvals, all the way through to infrastructure retrofit projects. And I think where the proverbial rubber hits the road is what happens if we don't, and what impact that has to us as urban foresters or landscape architects down the road. And all from a arboricultural perspective, I'll focus more on that. And what ends up happening is that the lack of consistency in a construction process, it typically yields poor results long term. And what ends up happening is that you get into a subdivision that doesn't have high quality soils as defined in the growing medium section now. And what ends up happening is that you've got trees that are really challenged with through the establishment phase and even long-term survivability. As a municipal arborist, now that means that we're going to incur longer term increased operating costs. And even longer term, it's also going to impact our a number of our key performance indicators for urban forest success and health, and one of which is canopy coverage. And so now, instead of a tree thriving, it's merely surviving. So what I think this standard really helps to provide is that consistency, that framework that Ron was talking about, and what it really is going to help long term is to really benefit things like the urban forest, as an example.
Thanks, Steve. I mean, that is just fascinating. I think all too frequently, it's the things that we don't think about. What are the things that might not happen that have these huge implications and consequences? And, I love how, from very different perspectives, Ron and yourself, you see these commonalities, like you said, with consistency that such a framework starts to present. Rhoda, I want to bring you in as our on this panel and on this question, because again, you have yet another perspective on this. And please, maybe I can ask you to share that and kind of how you can see an interface here between Ron and Steve and yourself in terms of the responses to this question.
For sure. Yeah, I can't agree more with what they both said, that, having a soil standard is so important, especially when you take a step back and you realize what really we're trying to focus on here. And is that's the survivorship of our urban trees, of our urban landscape plantings, right? We want all of that green stuff that we're spending money on to put in the soil. We want it all to actually grow. And if we don't have a soil standard, we can buy the highest, quality stock out there, and it's going to have a slim chance of survival if no one's been able to amend the soil properly or make sure that the soils are right for that particular tree or that particular shrub that's being put in the ground there. And it really highlights that too for professionals, where because we're focusing on the importance of having this growing media standard, I think professionals will realize that this is something that they need to focus on too. And when you dig deep and you see that it's not just about soil chemistry, that it's all about the physical properties of the soil, it's about the hydrological properties of the soil that are somewhat much more important in some ways. And some of the other things that we are currently testing in terms of, how well they'll work for tree survivorship, it really creates more that baseline understanding of what a good soil is for all of those using this document across Canada. So in that, it's really an important reference document too, and can help us, training the crew leads of tomorrow. If you can use this even in some of those university classes where folks are getting trained initially to understand what the importance factors that you should be looking at in terms of a healthy soil. This is a great way to start with that too. And just to reiterate what Steve and Ron both said, this is really important in order to determine that the trees that we are planting right now will grow.
And thanks so much, Rhoda, for complementing different perspectives here on our panel. I think consistently, I think all too often we focus on that canopy cover magical target, and people like to focus on that. And one of the things that I've learned from my involvement in Darby was instrumental in this, and her colleagues, it all starts with the soil. And I've had now soil pounded into my head. I don't think I'll ever think of soil the same way. And today, each of you really, I think, impressing and sharing just why that is so critical. And if we are actually going to invest all this money in green infrastructure and plant trees and want to increase our canopy cover and have all those wonderful benefits, really, we need to really focus and get the soil piece right. And that is so fundamental here. So,
yeah, and actually, to add to that, Ryan, if you don't mind me jumping in,
this is a great
because
conversation.
I will.
I love it.
I had the good fortune of attending the Canadian Urban Forest Conference in early October this year. And it was an interesting conference because it was in Charlottetown shortly after the hurricane. But we were able to actually help do some track assessments of those trees. It was good timing in some ways. But anyway, what I mean by that is that we had top researchers from all across Canada, like the Susan Days of our world. And it was interesting that again and again and again, I continued to hear folks say during their presentations, the canopy cover is not enough, and that it's almost like soils should really be our focus in terms of determining what makes a healthy urban forest. So I just thought I'd throw that out there because it seems like that's kind of the way that the academics are sort of leaning as well, which makes all this kind of that much more interesting too.
Thanks, Rhoda. For all those Jimmy Fallon fans out there, I want to pick up on, this is I think Rhoda's just provided us with an absolute gem. And so Jimmy Fallon does this thing, right, where he tries to get a hashtag trending. And I'm thinking, Rhoda, you're onto something here in our world. We could start a trending hashtag about canopy covers not enough. And maybe we can get everybody to start putting that out there. And maybe, we can, like Jimmy Fallon, influence, the Twitterverse and actually get that trending. I don't know. Maybe
if Twitter still exists.
Yeah, well, fair enough. Who knows these days? Anyways, back on track. So thanks, Rhoda. That was wonderful, and we'll see if we can get a trend started. I want to actually tie the last question I have for the panel, and encourage everybody to get those questions coming in, because we'll open it up to the audience here in a minute. But the last question I want to pose, I want to connect this conversation with our last one, and it was really interesting because it was about knowledge mobilization. And that really resonated with a lot of our members. How do we actually start? We had three excellent panelists expand and elaborate what knowledge mobilization means, what it's all about, and how we actually start going forward with that. And so I want to tie that in because I think that topic is really important to this conversation also. And how can we effectively mobilize the use of the National Growing Medium Standard, and who needs to be involved? So a two-part question to all three of you. Number one, how do we effectively mobilize it? And number two, who needs to be involved? Steve, you're going to kick us off on this one.
Thanks, Ryan. So throughout, I'm fortunate with working for the city of Burlington to have a very strong communications team, and one of the things they always drill into us is if you want to get a message across, you actually have to say it to somebody 7 times. And so when you really keep that in mind, when we're trying to think about knowledge mobilization and transferring this quite phenomenal bit of information on, we really need to dig into every single means possible to be able to communicate this. So as an example, for myself as a municipal arborist, I need to be looking at this and leveraging the growing, as an example, the growing medium section or the CLS in general, and incorporating aspects of it into my municipal policies, bylaws, specifications, all types of those things. That consistency across the board is going to obviously help with that knowledge mobilization. It then can, we can even look at how if there's any opportunities for us to align it with existing official plans and things like that. The who and who gets to sing this song, so to speak. I think we all have a part to play. Obviously, the big ones that are immediately at top of mind are the CNLA, the CSLA, so Canadian Nursery Landscape Association, Canadian Society of Landscape Architects, Landscape Ontario, as well as the ISA. Each one of us have got our individual provincial chapters that ultimately also have a role to play. I think what it would also be beneficial is even getting into the administration of this is looking at being able to maintain databases of accredited suppliers, databases of accredited testers, things like that, making it as easy as possible for people to adopt this standard and apply it to their everyday jobs. And I think municipalities can help play a key role in that. And lastly, Ron touched on this earlier, is that this information is incredibly valuable to be rolled out into the curriculum in our colleges and universities. I graduated from University of Guelph, God knows how many years ago, and I don't even want to think about that now. But one of the things we didn't focus on at the time was soils. And it is like, to Rhoda's earlier point, it is unbelievably valuable, even more so than some of the metrics we use to measure success today. We need to really drill that in into our post-secondary institutions. So anyway, back to you. Thank you.
I mean, I didn't even pay Steve to come up with that segue, but as a person with one foot in, the post-secondary world, at least at the universities, I mean, again, I just want to echo, I think it's not even just through our kind of regular courses in terms of, 4-credit degrees and offerings. I mean, at least at Brock now, we're also thinking about non-credit courses and ways we can do, extend that training outside even of, so as Rhoda was talking about earlier, when some of this information becomes available, how can we make sure our professionals stay up to date on it as it actually rolls out in some of our new non-credit courses? And there's certainly many interesting ways. And having Ron with us today, I mean, I just felt so humbled, Ron, with the credentials and the recognition that you've gained. And so maybe you can reflect on a little bit of that and some of the illuminating work that you've done. And I'll give you time to think about that. So we'll go to Rhoda next, and Ron, maybe you can have a few reflections. Steve, I noticed you were playing around with your microphone there. Did you have something you wanted to add before I go over to Rhoda? Or were you, you can't just interrupt me as a moderator. That's okay. You can just say, hey, Ryan, shut up. I need someone to say something.
You know what? I grew up in a big family and I could never get a word in edgewise. So I usually just wait until there's a bit of silence and then I can jump in. But all joking aside, I know, like, to your point, what's to say that there's a micro certificate offered in the future around soils? What landscape architect, certified arborist out there that wouldn't be interested in learning more about that? And as a professional, those types of professional development opportunities are so incredibly valuable. Anyway, I'll just leave it there.
Oh, you can't leave it there. I'm not going to allow that to slide. I mean, I think that's something that we should put directly to Rhoda as the lead of the Greening Landscape Research Consortium. I mean, they have a mandate. One of their pillars is around knowledge mobilization. And of course, we're starting to daydream already about the future of that consortium. So, maybe a micro certificate in soils is something that Rhoda as a lead should think about. And, with that very subtle bit of pressure put on Rhoda, I'm going to turn it over to her to provide us with some reflections. Over to you, Rhoda.
Thanks so much, guys. You know that my to-do list needs to get longer. That's great. That's great. No, I completely agree. I actually wrote that down just as you were saying it, Steve. I think it's a fantastic idea. And already we have a few other things in the works that we'll talk about some other conversation going on at Vineland with regards to really sharing and mobilizing this information with folks related to soils, whether they're just testing it or whether they're looking for information on how do I get this into my planting specs. So those are some of the things that that are going on behind the scenes right now here too. So yeah, I would say in addition to that, of course, we want to get this information into planting specs, but beyond that, making sure that municipalities value their soil as an infrastructure asset. They're starting to, include the importance of trees as an important aspect of their green infrastructure, but understanding, the carbon storage ability of soils and the structural stability of soils and the hydrological importance of soils as related to stormwater. And a lot of that starts from really understanding what makes a good soil, what makes a healthy soil, which is where, this starts. And so then, there's some work to do with municipalities there. And all of us are ambassadors in that, the folks of us who have developed it, the folks of us who are reading it, using it, applying it on a daily basis, being able to share that with some of the decision makers in our lives. And then as well, working with the suppliers to make sure that they really actually understand what's going on there. And so some of that might just be frankly one-on-one conversations with different folks to make sure that they know how best to apply it, and developing some better tools for communication. And some of those have already been developed, but then making sure that they're available to those who need it all across Canada. And then I think there's also another element of this, and perhaps this is me, like with my nerdy academic background speaking, but I always want to see the evidence base. So if you can show me that a healthier soil actually results in a healthier forest, that all this extra work I'm doing to make sure that my soil doesn't just have the right, amount of like nitrogen in it, that it has all of these other components, that actually results in a healthier tree. That's when I'm going to do the work, and that's when I'm going to invest the time to make sure that the soil is beneficial. So it's like putting some dollar figures behind the benefits of paying attention to soil, and putting some tree health benefits behind that too. Show me how this works. And so perhaps there's some more research to do out there too, just to showcase the importance of this.
Thanks, Rhoda. There's always more research to do, which is great. Otherwise,
Super
we'd be out
fun.
of jobs. So
Sure.
that in the evidence base, I'm certainly a big proponent of. So thanks for sharing all those insights. Ron, I want to go to you for our kind of final word here from the panelists before we open it up. And there's a lot to pick up on. I mean, Steve and Rhoda here have offered so much. Again, I'm humbled by your achievements and certainly work at Fanshawe and recognition. So I mean, if you could maybe speak to some of that education piece, and I think that would be great. But also, again, bring us back to this how and who around this very important piece of work. Over to you, Ron.
Great. Yeah, I think both Steve and Rhoda have touched on the important player here. It's the municipalities. If the municipalities just said all work that's done has to conform to the Canadian Landscape Standard, then the contractors would say, what's that? Oh, maybe I better get it and read the thing. Designers would say, oh, we better figure this out. And it would be the push that would get a lot of this happening. And that's what happened in BC. Municipalities require it. The industry responded. I think those who test our soil, we need to bring them on board in a way that the information they provide is more tailored to horticultural applications. Right now, I require soil tests. The contractor goes and gets a soil test. He sends them off to the lab. What do we get back? You need to use this number of pounds per acre of this and this number of pounds per acre of that. And the contractor's looking and saying, what? I'm not dealing with pounds per acre here. With the pH, what do I do about pH if it's not acceptable? So I think the testing labs can provide more direction and more instruction that's specific to our industry, so the contractors can implement the requirements to optimize the growth. And if we said, here's the Canadian Landscape Standard, we want you to test and then provide recommendations that are appropriate for our industry and our use. On the education side, I think there are lots of things we can do in incorporating the CLS into the curriculum in all schools, whether you're teaching horticulture, arboriculture, landscape design, construction. The CLS should be the basis on which the curriculum is organized and tested. And as Steve suggested, why can't we have certification through the Canadian Nursery Landscape Association, and embed the CLS in that, so that people are using it as a source of knowledge and the source of information. On the contractor side and supplier side, there's so much misinformation and confusion going on. This idea of if the soil is black, it's good. And so contractors are out there dredging swamps to get black earth because people think it's great. And then they take, marginal subsoil and mix it with compost and manure, call it three-way mix. This is good stuff. All the good stuff in it decomposes quickly, and what you're left with is the crap that they started with, but people don't know. And landscape contractors or landscape designers are speccing three-way mix, but it doesn't mean anything. It's just this, the confusion, it adds to the confusion. And I think directing everyone to the standard, this is the way we're going to work. The standard may change over time, absolutely, but at least we can get rid of a lot of the silliness that's going on out in the industry that's hurting us all in the long term.
Ron, I think that was a really great way to kind of wrap up the three questions I had, at least for our panelists. And I thank you for reflecting on both the initial question as well as the additional piece around education. At this stage, as you can imagine, we have comments flying left and right. My little chat counter, I think, is going to explode sooner or later, which is good. Jill and Jason, I think their fingers might need some time off road, or their fingers may hurt after this. We have lots of questions coming in for them from the lab, so it's great to have them in the lab answering those questions. So one of the things I want to make a few connections just while the questions are coming in. Tony, early on in our chat, asked, any ideas on how best to ensure stakeholders use the standards. And I want to, I think, Ron, you tackled that head on in terms of how to actually get them to use it, and provided a very clear and unequivocal way for that to occur. So I don't think we need to elaborate on that, but I thank you for answering Tony's question. Maybe the two of you are telepathic or something, and you knew Tony was going to ask that. Chanel is contributing to the hashtag trending healthy soils. That's wonderful. And so in terms of, I guess, next questions, they're just coming in here right now. Perfect. So question, where would you go, or where would you direct people in terms of finding this if we were going to try to get word out to, broad and beyond kind of landscape professionals? How do we get this information out to your average citizen to actually start getting some ideas about this? So if I'm doing a project, or if I want to influence my municipality to get this, how do we get the word out to that audience? It's one group that some of our folks are curious about. So the non-usual suspects, let's call them. And I'll open that up to anybody who's interested to answer that. How do we get the word out to our non-usual suspects?
Well, I can start answering that based on my historic work with environmental nonprofits. They are an excellent partner that do a lot of heavy lifting in terms of communicating with the public. They are often hosting free webinars or are face-to-face with, our caring citizenry, specifically those that are involved in tree planting. There are a lot of great tree planting groups out there that obviously need this information themselves, but then are having those one-on-one conversations with some of our most vocal citizenry. So I'm not going to say that that's going to be everything you need to do, but it's really a great first step is know those like movers and shakers in your community. And they may not be people that you normally would associate with in terms of other projects, but having those nonprofits understand exactly what you're doing and why it's important and how it fits into their overall mission and goals really can go a long way in terms of communicating with the public.
Thanks, Rhoda. That's wonderful. And if you ever want to retire from leading the consortium and your job at Vineland, I think coming up with really catchy phrases might just be a gift of yours, right? Like knowing the movers and shakers and digging deeper. Like you're working these things into almost every statement. I just love it. I don't know if it's on purpose or not, but so much fun to have you on the panel today.
Thanks,
Ron, Steve, any thoughts about unusual suspects and how we get this information more broadly distributed?
Well, environmental issues are really topical today. We're talking about native species. We're talking about pollinators. We're talking about all kinds of things that are important to the health of our environment. But nobody's talking about soils. We have to get these influencers to start picking up the baton and talking about, all of this is important, but it all begins with soils and doing a good job on soil so that the soil is responsive to the function that we're trying to apply. Are you growing trees? Are you growing pollinators? What is it you're growing? Then I think we'll all do a better job. But soils are just so poorly understood, and they're scientific and complex. You start talking about NPKs, you start talking about cation exchange capacity, and people sort of glaze over. They don't really get it. But the engineers have done a good job. I think in Ontario, we have the Ontario Provincial Standard Details, OPSDs. And nobody talks about the science anymore. It's just conform to the standard. You know, there's the detail. Scientists have figured this out. The engineers have figured it out. They've got a detail. Use that. And we've got to push people in that direction.
Ron, I love it. So I mean, you're saying we need a soil influencer, right? Did you think of somebody? Like, all I can think of is influencer. I'm so out of my depth here when it comes to influencers. I'm thinking like Kim Kardashian influencer. Is that what you're thinking? We need like a Kim Kardashian of soil?
Well,
Something
Tony's
like,
on this call. Tony's on this call. He just retired.
Tony could be our soil influencer. I love that thought. Thanks, Ron.
He's going to kill me.
Steve, anything you want to add before we go to the next question here?
Yeah, sure, Ryan. One of the things that I found helpful is, and I think that it lends itself to the soil discussion as well. A lot of people don't understand urban forestry. They don't understand trees. In a similar vein, people not understanding soils, what I found is you try to have those conversations in their language. So for example, when you talk about the benefit of trees to a stormwater engineer, you don't talk about the carbon sequestration or anything like that. You talk about how a structural soil cell can reduce total suspended solids, for example. That type of thing. I think these allied professionals, I'll call them, the role that we play as landscape architects, arborists, what have you, is we need to approach them speaking their language. And we need to talk to them about how important it is to understand soils and apply the CLS to really improve the end result of their individual projects.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I mean, I think there's some great takeaways here about speaking the right language, having good influencers, and talking to movers and shakers. So just really key responses. Let's get to our next question from Matthew. And Matthew asks, based on your experience working on various landscape projects, which soil properties did you find to be most critical to planning success? And what resources did you use to help build those properties? Please, not everybody jump in at once. I see Ron kind of nodding knowingly, but I see Rhoda has her microphone unmuted first. So we're going to go to Rhoda and then Ron.
Well, high level, often when we are having soils tested, like Ron mentioned earlier, it's looking at, NPK, and yeah, that's so, it's so temporary, and that there are much more important things in the soil that we need to be looking at, like soil structure and the hydrological features of our soil. So that's where I would start. Maybe Ron wants to add a lot more to that.
Ron's got that look on his face like he has so much he wants to say on this question. So jump in, Ron, all you.
How much time do we have for my lecture on soils? No, we don't have enough time. What is soil? Soil is ground up rock. That's all it is. And it is a habitat for all kinds of organic life that provides for the ability to grow. So if I would start with the texture. What is it? A clay, silt, sand, loam? Where does it fit within that? And then amendments like NPK. We can add that. We can add organic material. We can add things to it. But oftentimes we over-process the soil. So we start with what might be a fairly good soil with good living organism built into it, and then we put it in a stockpile and leave it there for a couple of years. And then we bring a screen out and make it fluffy, so that when you're selling by the yard, making fluffy makes sense. But then you lose all the PEDs, and all the sort of good quality of the soil is screened out. And then we put this down and expect that things are going to be great. So it's just it's knowledge, an understanding for what soil is. But I would start first with what is the textural value? Generally pH. I mean, in Ontario, I've never really had to amend pH because we have sort of high buffer here. It's slightly alkaline. If you're dealing with acid soils, maybe in the prairies or BC, you're going to do some liming, but for the most part, you don't need to know what your foundation is, and then look at what your product needs to be, and then amend the soil accordingly. And don't screen.
Thanks, Ron. I don't think I'll ever order soil the same way again without thinking, wow, that's fluffy and I'm getting charged by the amount. Thanks, appreciate it. Next question's from Sherry. And Steve, I'm going to leave you out of this round because you're going to start off this question, okay? Fantastic. So Sherry asked, how and where can practitioners from across the country start to come together to make the most of and continue to build this resource?
Why'd you have to start with me?
You can exercise the path. That's fine. We actually, we refer to that as the flick. So if you were going to flick this
Nice.
to Ron, for example, you'd want to say, that's an excellent question. I think Ron is well positioned, given his eminent professor status, to answer this. And then you've just politely flicked the entire question to Ron. I was just trying to share around the answers, but you can definitely flick it to Ron if you want.
No, I think sharing this resource, I think, is, and we touched on it earlier in the talk, is really our own responsibilities as professionals and members of our own organizations, to really build on this, and keying into the efficacy side as well. So a bit of a digression, very quickly. We're doing a pilot right now with Vineland through the city of Burlington on a focus on soil microbiology and how that might help to improve the establishment of trees and things like that. Where the rubber would really hit the road is being able to share that information, that knowledge transfer with other municipal arborists, other arborists within the industry, publish that information, share it to the masses, so that so we can really build on this, because like we've said, this is a living document, so things will change. We will learn more. So let's not stop there. Let's just continue the conversation going. With that, I will pass it over to Ron or Rhoda to shed a little light on it.
Well, I think what's happening today is a demonstration of how to do it. When did we ever talk before? When did we get landscape architects and arborists and scientists around the table and say, hey, what about soils? We need to work together here. And that's, I think, the beauty of the standard, is that it brings the industry together with a focus, and then we can come up with solutions. They may not be perfect to start, but they force us to move in the right direction.
Thanks, Ron. Rhoda, did you have something you wanted to add here, or are you good? I love it. So another question's come in, and I think this is a nice extension of Sherry's question. I mean, today's co-sponsored, right, by the consortium and the consortium members, obviously, in the ISAO. So what could those two organizations in particular, what role could they play in mobilizing the CLS and particularly Section 5? And I think, Ron, you started us off really well. They're saying, well, this is an example. We're starting to have these conversations. We're starting to talk about these things. But I also think going forward, what could these two entities do that came together to make today possible? What could we collectively do to kind of move this forward and continue this momentum? I think it's a great way to kind of finalize our conversation today.
Well, I'll start with that. Sorry, my voice is now going too. And I think, Ron spoke to the fact that this standard has brought us together, but I would say without the Greening the Landscape Consortium, we wouldn't have an audience listening in on all of these conversations that we're having right now, right? This would be something where, the four of us might be sitting around the table talking about what we can do to improve these things and how we can apply it, but we wouldn't have this whole other group of people who now can take this information and bring it home. And I think that is a really key part of knowledge mobilization, is making sure that we're reaching as many people as possible, people who are, applying this information, using this information on a daily basis and sharing it with the others on their own teams. So that's a start. But then as well. Throughout the Greening the Landscape Consortium, we have these, specific case studies where we're working with, specific groups of members who are really interested in answering specific questions related to urban forestry, but they may not have the capacity to do it on their own. And so then we bring groups of them together, maybe 4 or 5 or up to 10 or 12 different groups, whether they be municipalities, conservation authorities, soil amendment suppliers, and try to answer those questions, sort of sharing our resources in order to answer some of those big questions. And that's where something like this could fit in, is if you need some of that information related to the growing media standard, or you're looking for ways to better reach your municipality, your municipal leaders, in order to make sure they see the importance of this. You're not doing it on your own, right? You've got others, you got friends that you can learn from, that you're talking with, that, those connections have been made. So, you might be sitting here in Hamilton, where I am, and talking, trying to figure out how to reach your council in order to, get these specs into your planting requirements for tender. And you may not know that, somebody way up in the city of Ottawa is dealing with the exact same question. So making sure that you can, work together to solve problems like that is one way of bringing this forward.
Yeah, but soils aren't just Canada.
No, that's true.
These issues are world. I was just at the American Society's conference in San Francisco last week, and we were talking about soils there and biochar, and what's the role of biochar in carbon sequestration, and what are the problems with that, and what about soil mixing? How do we effectively mix soils? I mean, the kinds of issues we're dealing with. Now that we have a forum and we're plugged into organizations, we can bring in the world to talk about these things. What's going on with urban street tree planting in Copenhagen? They've got this new method they're using there. Does it work? Does it work here? So yeah, it's exciting. We're finally opened the door. Yeah.
One final piece, and I'm quite pleased to be able to share it on this, is this dialogue between our allied professions, I think, has improved quite dramatically over the last decade. And I think initiatives like Greening the Landscape Consortium, rolling out further iterations of the CLS, obviously help support that. But even little things like this year, one of the perks of the job being on the board was being invited to the OALA conference. And in turn, we're inviting the OALA to ours. And this knowledge transfer is so incredibly valuable because, to Ron's point, we're dealing with all of the same problems. So let's be like, oh, hey, what are the arborists doing? Or, hey, what are the LAs doing? And how might we be able to apply this to what we're facing? And the last piece here is each individual organizations can leverage things like our monthly publications. Our magazine, for example, can reach 1,000 members. Like, that's huge. And Landscape Paysage even more so. So that's anyway, a huge tool in the toolbox for us from a knowledge transfer.
I mean, that we couldn't have ended, I think, on a higher note. And one of the things I'm a big fan of is always ending when you're on a high note instead of going out on a low note. So I with that, I mean, I just want to thank all of our panelists on behalf of the Greening Landscape Consortium and the International Society of Arboriculture Ontario. My sincere thanks to our 3 panelists. Wonderful, humorous, thoughtful, knowledgeable. I mean, just ticks all the boxes. Can't thank the 3 of you enough for your insights today. I also want to thank our technical soil experts, Jason and Jill, who came to us live from the lab and were able to interact with many of you. Just thanks so much, Jason and Jill, for that. I also want to personally really thank our incredible consortium team behind the scenes that you don't see on camera, but make today possible. And I, for one, would be totally lost without them. So just can't say enough thank you for them. Last but not least, please stay tuned for more of our Greening the Landscape conversations. I want to end again by just echoing Ron's observations about starting with this partnership and this reach and modeling this and starting a conversation. And it really is, the reason we call this a conversation is that something continues ongoing, and we we will move this forward again in 2023 and address topics that are important to you, our members. So with that, I want to say thank you, stay safe, and we'll see you all again soon.